over a couple of housekeeping items. So you've probably noticed that you're on mute right now. That's just so we can avoid background noises that may distract you from listening to the webinar. But we, of course, do want to encourage active participation. So if you have a question, just type it into the question box of the right-hand side of your webinar screen, and we'll answer as many of them as possible. I also want to introduce our speaker today, Dave Williams. So Dave is a solution director here at Analytics 8. Dave has spent over 20 years in the IT industry, and he advises his clients on how to address their business challenges using data and technology. Dave has also spent a lot of his career focusing on BI and analytics for the retail industry. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Dave.
Great. Thanks, Tracy. And thanks, everyone, for joining today on this Wednesday afternoon. So as Tracy said, I'm Dave Williams, and I work for Analytics 8. And to provide some background on Analytics 8, we're a consulting firm. We're focused on analytics, business intelligence, and data management, all the way from imagining the art of the possible with respect to using data intelligently to constructing enterprise-level architectures and implementing BI tools. We support many different clients on analytics and data science initiatives. Importantly, we also help our customers craft strategies and roadmaps to better use analytics and better glean insights from data in pursuit of their business objectives. This webinar is about data strategy, and we'll look at the 7 key elements of a data strategy. We'll look at examples of the benefits those elements provide and how to get started on your own data strategy. You will be able to leverage our experience and lessons learned to make your data strategy initiative more effective. For the purpose of simplicity and consistency throughout the webinar, we'll focus on the retail industry. It's an industry that we're all familiar with because we're all shoppers. But many of the challenges facing retailers today, we're also well aware of because of the many stories in the media. As we go through the conversation today, I encourage you to think about the similarities to your industry and your business. How can you take the recommendations provided here to your management team and your colleagues? And if you need, at the end of the presentation, my contact information will be provided. Feel free to reach out to discuss your current situation. That we live in a data-centric world is not a surprise to anyone listening. Data is everywhere. Companies create vastly more data than they know how to process, and it's coming in from hundreds of sources. Small data, big data, internal data, external data, historical data, forecast data, sales data, inventory data, customer data. But what are retailers doing with this data? Leading retailers are separating the signal from the noise within their data, and they're employing advanced techniques to accurately anticipate what's going to happen within their business. However, it's a mistake to think that all data is valuable. Not all data is created equal. Not all data holds the promise of an insight. While most retailers recognize that their data is important, many are not taking advantage of it. For example, retailers have transaction-level data from point-of-sale systems, but few retailers know the affinity between any of their products. Even fewer actually use that insight. Retailers know their data is a strategic asset. They know they have a lot of it, and they want to make decisions based on the analysis of their data rather than relying on intuition. And they know they want to make those decisions quickly. But the problem is, it's complicated, especially in conjunction with responding to market pressures facing retailers. After all, the same staff that are tasked with running the business are also responsible for innovating. Most companies are going to prioritize the urgent, tactical data they need over longer term, more strategic initiatives. Often the data is scattered in silos, stuck in departmental systems that don't talk well with one another. The quality of the data is poor, and the associated costs are high. They don't have the people, the process, or the technologies in place to handle the immense data available to them, much less leverage the available data. Of the many market drivers within the retail industry, here are a few that retailers are busy responding to. The consumer. Consumers have been shopping across multiple platforms for years. And if they're not shopping online, then they're researching online. They're more informed than ever, and they have more options than ever. And they have more power than ever, thanks to the reach of their social networks. The consumer is changing, and so is the supply chain. With the myriad of ways customers want to receive and return their products, retailers need to be able to quickly and efficiently handle this merchandise and account for it. And when was the last time any of us stepped foot into a physical store? Well, if you're like me, about 2 days ago. Physical stores aren't going anywhere. They are evolving beyond being simply a point of purchase for customers into points of distribution. And with these modern challenges, some retailers are catching up and some are taking advantage. Now, many retailers are thriving because of the use of their data. And whether their brand recognition is high or low, the constant is using data to their advantage. For example, a couple of Analytics 8 clients, Duluth Trading Company. As they continued to expand, they needed to more efficiently investigate sales performance and better plan their inventory and labor. However, it was really difficult for them, really time consuming to get to that data, to get to that analysis. Business leaders had to rely on IT for answers, something many of us are familiar with. And in many cases, business users wanted answers to follow-up questions, the data which wasn't provided. They needed to know more than what did happen. They needed to have a sense for what was going to happen. So Analytics 8 developed a solution that pulls data from many sources and merges the company's historical data with the forecast data. Using security and interactive filters efficiently, we enabled the ability for users to weed through massive amounts of data to see just what they were looking for without flooding IT with requests and waiting days, maybe weeks, for answers. Design Within Reach needed a way to perform density analysis of current and prospective customers in relation to its store locations. They used an Analytics 8 tool called Click Maps, which is a geospatial analytics tool, through which they can visualize on a map where their customers live relative to existing stores. It also allows them to see where gaps exist that could be good locations for new stores. The solution helped the company understand where its marketing efforts were working and where they needed to be optimized. None of these companies came to use data in a strategic way by accident. They didn't start by fixing a series of individual issues to discover they ended up with a strategy. They all took intentional steps to build a strategic plan that defines how data contributes to their business. Each of them took into account the following core aspects to build a plan that earned them success: people, process, technology. A modern comprehensive data strategy exists only because the company has business objectives to meet. It defines into a single plan what the involved employees need in order to more effectively use data, the processes required to ensure corporate data is high quality and accessible, and the technology that will enable the storage, sharing, and analysis of data. A data strategy may sound technical, but without a focus on people and process, it will fall flat. The exercise of creating a data strategy is one in which organizational leaders take an objective look at the business through the lens of data to anticipate what needs to happen to bring about the specific objectives the company has defined. It answers the question of how can the organization leverage data in support of its business goals. And importantly, it ends with a plan that weaves elements from all three of these core pillars together. All retailers should be trying to mature across their organizations according to Gartner's analytic ascendancy model, to move from description, or what happened, for example, calculating labor cost or average lead times, to diagnostic, or determining why something happened, such as, why is it taking so long to process a return, or what was the impact of stockouts on sales performance, to predictive, anticipating what's going to happen. For example, what new product is going to excite a retailer's core customers, to prescriptive, or suggesting how to do something, such as when is the best time of day to process ship from store orders. With a data strategy, we lay out the plan to mature in analytics capability. We move up each area of the business a level or two based on their needs. So let's look at the key areas or the key elements of a data strategy. And today we'll talk about each of these critical components. Now, these are defined based on our experience of leading dozens of clients through the process of creating a data strategy and then executing on that strategy. The intent with these elements is to provide value at each step of the process. Each step is actionable. They provide tangible takeaways or deliverables. As we look at each element, I'll define what it is, and then we'll discuss a real life example of what this element looks like in practice. In general, these are presented in chronological order. However, there's no need to take the order too literally. Some of these steps can be done in parallel and some can be done in a different order. Before we get into business requirements, the first key element, I want to give you a key to success, and that's prep work. One of the keys to success in creating a data strategy is the prep work that's done before the effort officially kicks off. So communicating why so many probing questions are about to be asked, gathering documentation, laying out a schedule, and communicating expectations. Those are all critical activities that should be completed before officially starting to gather requirements. Okay, the first element of a successful data strategy, business requirements. So we talked about the first key to success, prep work. Well, the next key to success is having executive level support for the effort and the recommendations that come from it. The champion of the data strategy is the executive that's leading the charge. It's this person who will rally support for the investment and provide executive leadership. Stakeholders and other subject matter experts will represent specific departments or functions within the company, but the champion represents the entire company. We orient the data strategy around business goals and objectives. It's critical to approach the data strategy from the point of view of supporting the business. Now, these high-level objectives are company level goals likely already exist for the company. They certainly should exist, but they may not be documented. And if they are, they may not be tied to data or analytics. And so by starting with gathering and documenting the business requirements, we overcome a roadblock to many IT or technical projects, which is knowledge of what the business is trying to accomplish. Now, sometimes these goals or objectives exist at the company level, or sometimes they exist for a specific department. In either case, the stated goals for both levels should sync up. These objectives, these goals, are most effectively gathered through an interview process that starts at the executive level. And then continues down to the leaders of the departments that are included within the effort. We know all retailers want to increase revenue and lower costs, but the stated objectives have to go much deeper than that. Through this process, we'll discover what the leaders are trying to measure. Upon what are they trying to improve? And we'll discover the questions they're trying to answer. A data strategy for one of our clients resulted in a clear understanding of their challenge, a sample of which is summarized here. They know they are competing against Amazon, and they have the advantage of being able to provide service in their stores. But they didn't understand their customer base well enough to know what types of service to offer. They also knew they were spending a significant amount of time preparing and scrubbing data for their store operations group and their many franchise owners. They were keeping up, but it took a Herculean effort to do so. They were asking many business critical questions for which they didn't have a sufficient answer. And in some cases, they didn't have any answer. They knew they needed to understand their inventory positions of their key items across all their locations. They also needed to report on sales performance as it relates to their plan, and then drill into various dimensions to investigate why they may be underperforming, and to allow their franchise owners a basis for comparison without sharing any sensitive data. We work with them to identify the metrics that would represent answers to the questions they were asking. At this point, we couldn't provide the data to the metrics, we couldn't define the metrics, but we did have the different components that would serve as answers to their questions. For example, inventory turns for their items and customer conversion rate by channel. With this, we moved on to the second step, the second key element of a data strategy. With a good understanding of what questions the business is asking and what KPIs will provide the answers to those questions, we can start defining the sources of data and understanding how data is gathered. We analyze the available data sources and how that data is gathered and define where that data exists within the enterprise. Now, it's unlikely that all data will be available within the organization. And if it is, that it exists in a place that's accessible to everyone who needs it. So we need to work backwards to find the source for the data that's required. For data that can be found in-house, it does exist within the enterprise. In this step, we note the source system and we note any roadblocks to getting access to that data. We also need to define whether that data is at the right level of detail and whether it's updated with the right frequency to answer the question the business is asking. We also need to ask if the data is private or has particular privacy requirements, especially in light of GDPR and CCPA. We ask if getting access to the data is guarded by restrictions brought on by software licensing. And for data that isn't available within the enterprise, we'll note that here and pick it up in the next step. So for example, if a business question that needs to be answered is about how the retailer's brand is perceived before and after a big product launch, or before and after the holiday season or back to school, let's say the retailer has call center data and traffic counts for stores, for physical stores and online. And of course, they have sales data and return information. But that doesn't measure how customers are feeling. It doesn't capture what customers are saying or sharing on their social networks about the brand. So the retailer may choose to pull in social media data to measure sentiment and couple that with the call center data, the traffic data, and the sales data. So we'll note that the social media data may not exist. And as I said, we'll get to that in the next step. But clearly the opportunity to pull in that social media data is identified. So let's look at an example from one of our clients. For one of our clients, we built a matrix that was admittedly more complex than the sample. We identified the question the business partners wanted to ask. We understood the data needed to answer the question and mapped each to a source system. Understanding which channel drives the most conversions likely involves data from multiple systems, e-commerce, traffic counters, point of sale, to name a few. Identifying these questions then leads to additional questions and better questions. So instead of comparing total counts of conversions, we can look at conversions in terms of overall revenue or profitability. And reducing lead time in the BOSIS scenario required answers from historical data, but also operational tests. So after implementing a new operational process, further in-store changes were tested to find the optimal combination of operational changes to be implemented across the retailer. We identified historical data that the client had and the missing data, which is the data from the operational tests. Note, we didn't solve for the missing data at this point. In our discussions about current state, we gained a sense for what the solution might be, but this stage is more about taking an inventory of the data and an inventory of the source systems that provide that data. The next stage is where we turn our attention to more technical topics, working with our counterparts in IT. Building a flexible and scalable data architecture is the third step in establishing a data strategy. This is a complex topic for which there are many options, many different approaches. So we'll just touch on a couple of highlights here, a number of things to consider. So one thing to consider is to what extent can an operational system, maybe an existing operational system, support analytical needs? Likely very little. It's generally not best practice to rely on an operational system to meet analytical needs. This may mean a central data repository would be useful. Another thing to consider is whether the organization has the skills and the technical infrastructure to support that data repository or data warehouse maybe on premise. And if not, would looking to the cloud as a solution make more sense? Another topic to consider, where the data doesn't exist today, how will that gap be filled? Can the data be calculated? Can it be estimated? Can it be purchased from a third-party market trend data or macroeconomic data provider? Or can a new source system be implemented to generate the data? How are we going to get data from the source system into that central repository is another factor. factor. It's another question to be asked. Maybe there's a standard integration tool in place. Will we look to this level of the architecture to be leveraged for business logic so that when the data is in that central data repository, it's ready to be used? And finally, how will we provide or provision access to the data? Are we going to ask IT to create all reports? Or are we going to enable the business for self-service? Will the reports be pixel perfect or printable reports? Or will the reports allow user interaction with the data? Will we embed the reports into websites? Will we provide them to people outside the network? All of these considerations will be taken into account as we build the technology infrastructure. And as with most designs, the more requirements and the future needs are taken into account, the more the solution will actually support the business. Here's a conceptual diagram and abstraction of the different types of analysis and storage that need to be captured either through technology or a process. An architecture diagram will identify and represent all the source systems, all the methods to ingest data, and all the landing spots for that data. It'll include data marts, data lakes, data warehouses. It will also layer in, again, conceptually, processes like data governance and information security. These are very helpful tools in communicating and planning the overall architecture. And for many companies who go through the data strategy process, this piece does end up representing where the bulk of the investment will need to be made. On these diagrams, we note what exists currently and what needs to be added. We can denote external sources versus internal sources of data. And finally, we indicate which tools will be used for which types of data analysis. These diagrams are particularly helpful in showing the incremental changes by phase for a strategy that has multiple phases or stages to its rollout. In other words, different versions of this diagram can incrementally add new capabilities or remove capabilities in the situation where we're decommissioning different systems. The fourth element of a data strategy is the presentation of data to the end users, using data to win insights. Currently, many old school methods still exist to interact with and share data. Many companies still rely on Excel and email. Maybe a legacy BI tool that doesn't allow interaction with the data. Significant data wrangling may be required, which is oftentimes a tedious, manual, terrible process. Heavy reliance on IT also exists in many companies today. An IT team that inadvertently becomes a bottleneck. There's an implied speed when we aim to turn data into insights. There's an ease of use. There's an ability to interact with the data. And more, there's a reliance on the tool itself to suggest insights. Some factors that should always be considered include visualizations. Would it be helpful to see the data in a more visual way from the perspective of a business user? Would that facilitate quickly spotting trends, quickly spotting outliers? And if so, what are the best practices of presenting data in a visual way? Storytelling with data means leading the business user on a path to understanding why and how the core KPIs came to be by placing relevant data nearby, and understanding what questions the user will ask to further understand those KPIs. Democratization of data refers to sharing data far and wide across the landscape, enabling as many people as possible with insights from data. However, it is possible to create more confusion by sharing too much data without enough context. That's why having common definitions and metrics defined across the organization is important. And we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about data governance. Data granularity. So presenting too detailed information to an executive or too high a level of detail to an analyst are ineffective. Getting the right level of detail to the right audience is critical. Some users will need to be able to interact with data. For example, drilling into a particular metric to see the data that make up that KPI. Let's take a look at a couple examples of data visualizations. This dashboard helps retailers understand online shopping cart behavior. The data presented here in multiple visualizations enables the analysis of why customers removed items from their carts. It takes a historical view of what times of day products were removed from their carts and their frequency of doing so. And for the highest selling items, how many times were those items removed from the online shopping cart? It allows interaction in multiple ways, including limiting the product based on the brand and adjusting the time frame of the period that's being reviewed. To put this in terms of the analytics ascendancy model, this is an example of a descriptive dashboard. It shows history. Here's a different dashboard. This one displays sales across 5 different shopping channels. It's a step up on the ascendancy model, being diagnostic. It tells the story of how the retailer's sales for one year compare with the previous year's sales. That's on the far left side, while also answering the next likely questions a retail executive will ask. Specifically, how are sales by channel? So going one level down within the structure of the organization, down to the channel level. It anticipates other follow-up questions, such as how do returns factor in, and how are transactions trending over time. Both metrics provide helpful context, and their proximity to the core metrics prevent busy executives from having to dig for them. So very quickly, the executive is able to focus in on issues related to the online sales channel, which in this example is the only channel that's down. Modern BI and data visualization software are incredibly powerful tools that enable data to be presented in elegant and beautiful ways. The 5th factor in a data strategy has 2 main components. In this stage, we look at both the people in the organization and the processes related to creating, sharing, and governing data. A data strategy is likely going to introduce a new way to do things that relies more on data and data analysis, and maybe new tools as well. Based on this, it makes sense to look at the skill sets of the people who will be using the tools to understand their strengths and where they'll need support. You might identify a need to boost the in-house talent and train current staff to use data more effectively, and to hire more data-driven people. The current organizational structure should be looked at because some changes may be recommended in order to prioritize roles that deal with data in a hands-on way. A company might decide if analysts should be assigned to business units or be kept central in an IT organization. that also implies the decision of how IT will support the business in their use of data in analytics. The size of the team should also be analyzed to determine whether the current team has capacity to build the analytics roadmap, or alternatively, if the team should be supported by external experts. Even topics like employee reviews and incentive plans can be evaluated. After all, these can be used as levers to encourage employees to use data in the way the organization is intending. Internal training capabilities need to be understood, whether the organization uses a learning management system or has a trainer on staff. For a retailer with a distributed workforce, increasing data literacy can be a challenge, which is why it's important to have an approach to data enablement that reaches employees in the stores, in the DCs, as well as headquarters. Moving on to process, typical organizations have unintentional roadblocks to not only getting access to the data, but to using the data in meetings and decision-making. Those roadblocks have to be identified and improved. Some business processes may need to be re-engineered to incorporate data analysis. We can get very detailed with this by documenting the steps in the business process and specifically where a report or a metric would be leveraged as input to a decision. We can mandate that specific data be provided as rationale for a business decision. Also, getting a quick win within the business that's based on a new use of data needs to be celebrated and promoted to build internal momentum and provide some positive peer pressure to those who may be holding on to the old way of doing things that may provide them a lot of security. We discussed enablement or training within the organization a minute ago. For one of our clients, we built a training plan that included every level of the organization. When employees are handed new tools, but not shown how to think differently about their jobs, the end result is unlikely going to change. And it's not just new tools, right? We found that providing training on topics like data literacy and data visualization, do's and don'ts, and the governance procedures that will be put in place has a much more positive effect in changing the culture than simply providing the tools and hoping for a different result. In addition to helping this retailer with employee enablement, we assisted them in identifying organizational changes, such as where their BI analysts should report within the organization. We also helped them create a job description for a new role as leader of their business analytics group. This client knew they needed to invest in people in order to move their company culture towards being data-centric. Data governance is another topic that generally falls under the category of process, and it can also stand on its own. That's why we have it as a distinct element of a data strategy. Data governance means a lot of things and covers a lot of areas. So while the term may not sound flashy or modern, the value it provides should far outweigh any bad connotations. That's why ultimately, it's data governance that ultimately allows enterprise level sharing of data. This is the oil that lubricates the machinery of an analytics practice. A practice of data governance will ensure that calculations used across the enterprise are determined based on input from across the enterprise. Also, that the right people have access to the right data and data lineage. In other words, defining where did the data originate and how was it transformed since its origination. Data governance has to happen. It's required in a modern data and analytics environment. Leadership and cross-departmental collaboration are necessary. This is people work. We don't look to a tool here. We don't look to a tool to solve data governance. This takes leadership and often requires navigating through difficult and emotional conversations. Developing a data dictionary is a good place to start. This is a living document in which all end user measures and dimensions are formally defined. There's often vigorous discussion about terms used at the organization. However, it's during these conversations that misunderstandings are identified and corrected. As I indicated, data governance is a cross-departmental function. It's also a function that ideally spans multiple levels within the organization. For another of our clients who was lacking in any governance related to their data, we helped them identify a structure to a new data governance committee. So this client didn't have a data governance practice at all. They knew they needed something, but they didn't know how to approach it. They didn't have the expertise. They asked us to step in and establish and lead a data governance committee. So they wanted to leverage Analytics 8 as the outside expert to help influence their team and align their team towards best data management practices. So, like I said, we built the committee with the structure similar to what's displayed here. We facilitated weekly data governance committee meetings and very quickly established a data dictionary that will be continually modified and enhanced. The frequency of those meetings decreased over time, and we eventually allowed executive members to send delegates in their place once the committee was on solid footing and had established a bit of a routine, a bit of a process. One thing to note on this committee is the seniority of the committee members. Executive and senior leadership played a significant role, as you can see from the chief operating officer to multiple VPs. We also recommended specific responsibilities be added to people's jobs and to identify some subject matter experts within each department, people who became the go-to resources within those departments when it came to answering questions on data. As you'll see, the Data Governance Committee is just one task on the plan to become a data-centric organization. Because the final stage in the development of a data strategy is a roadmap. So finally, the plan all comes together on a roadmap. This is the 7th step in the process. This is the culmination of all the work we've done to this point. And this is what makes all our previous work actionable. In other words, we can take action based on this roadmap. To this point, we've identified all that needs to happen to bring a company from their current state to leveraging data more for their business objectives. But before getting started with any design, with any building, with any training or business process re-engineering, it's critical to prioritize and plan the activities. For each recommendation, each task that will help bridge the gap from current state to future state, it's important to understand the feasibility or difficulty and the expected business value it will provide. When we talk about difficulty, how difficult is it to implement the recommendation? And difficulty may mean a long timeline. It might refer to a significant expense or technical complexity, maybe an operational process that touches a widely dispersed workforce, and how much value to the business that solution will provide. Value defined as maybe saving on labor or decreasing labor, maybe providing a brand new metric that will be used at the executive level, or simplifying a widely used process. The plan or the roadmap will prioritize those recommendations that are easiest to implement and provide the greatest value to the business. Other factors to include in the plan are staff availability and whether outside help is required, a company's budgeting process, in particular if a large capital investment is required, and any other major projects happening throughout the enterprise that might prevent the right resources from participating in the rollout. In the roadmap, we weave together the tasks from all areas that we investigated: people, process, and technology. Finally, the plan should incorporate highlighting the wins that are earned along the way. Earning a quick win or two to promote within the organization is a great way to create some grassroots demand for better data and analytics in other areas of the organization. That's key to establishing a data-driven culture, which really brings us full circle. We started by identifying business goals and sought out how we could reach those objectives by leveraging data. So what we're really doing is building a data-driven culture, a culture that has a workforce that values data and the insights that come from it, one that looks to put data to use for it. An organization might be early in the journey, or it might be close to maturity. But the company that looks to use data as a competitive differentiator in pursuit of their business is one that is going to succeed. So with that, we've got a little bit of time left over to talk about a couple resources available from Analytics 8 and also take any questions. Tracy, should I take a couple questions now, or do you want to talk about a couple of the resources available first?
Sure, maybe while people type in some questions, I can just go over a couple resources and you can go over the questions. So this presentation obviously just scratched the surface when it comes to talking about data strategy, as we could only fit content into an hour. So I just wanted to let everyone know that we do have a lot of resources that are available on our website and blog. So don't worry about writing these down. I will send out links to this stuff afterwards. But on the screen here, just a couple of spots on our website where we do provide some good content. And this content is written by our consultants and experts on things they have learned while working in the field. So we have our blog. We also have a page if you want to go to the subscription center to subscribe, to get our emails, to get invites to webinars like this. We also have a bunch of recorded webinars that are similar to this one on different topics. And then our upcoming events are where we post new webinars that we'll be doing, or trade shows, or other in-person events. So just wanted to point that stuff out while we took a second here for people to type in some questions.
Great. So Tracy, one of the questions, actually a couple of the questions that have come in have to do with timeline and just the duration. So I think that the intent with the question is, how long does a data strategy process really take? And that's a good question. There's no one single answer to that question. We've seen these take anywhere from 6 or 8 weeks on the low end all the way to 12 to 14 weeks. So that's going to depend on at what level the data strategy is analyzed or performed on, the level of involvement from clients and the extent to which our roles are defined, and really how ambitious that end roadmap looks to be. So one of the first things that we do after that roadmap, by the way, is establish a detailed plan to execute on, and we can certainly get into that plan as part of the data strategy. But again, that's going to have a bit of a factor in determining what the ultimate timeline is. So I hope that answered the question. Another question here that's coming in is, who from the organization is typically involved in a data strategy? And so, typically a data strategy is going to involve people from both the business, the different lines of business within the organization, the users of the analytics, and those that are asking those business critical questions that we talked about early, as well as IT, right? I mean, IT is largely going to be responsible for managing the data, managing the tools that end users use to analyze the data. And so they're going to be involved as well. So it's leaders, so as high in the organization as we can go, so typically at the executive level, and a step or two down from that level as well, both on the business side as well as IT. And then there's subject matter experts or experts from the different lines of business that participate as well. So again, I hope that that answered the question. So it looks like there's not many more questions coming in. Feel free, you've got my contact information on the screen now. I would certainly welcome any additional questions via email, reach out on Twitter, etc. And certainly appreciate everybody being on the webinar today.
Great, thanks again, Dave. And like I said before, I will send a follow-up email to everyone that has a link to this recording and some of those resources as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and conclude our webinar. Thanks again so much for joining, and we hope that you have a great day. Bye.